shop. Moshe is being audited by the IRS. And they start asking all these questions. I don't know what you're asking from me. I work hard. I work every single day. I work long hours, long shifts. I work crazy. We're showing $70,000 income to the two of us. What are you making us crazy for? So the IRS says, we have no problem with you showing the income. Our problem is with the business deductions that you're claiming. So what's the problem? So you're showing 10 trips to Israel as a business expense. So Moshe says, of course, we deliver. Okay, even from before the destruction of the temple, the prophet Yeshayahu, the prophet Isaiah warns, prophet Yeshayahu tells the Jewish people that a time is going to come when the temple will be destroyed and they will be yearning for the city of Yerushalayim once again. If you read, let's start with text number 1. Let's get straight to the text and we'll do the video afterwards. Who has the books open? Student, you want to read?
What page?
Page 93 in the student textbook. Text number 1 from Isaiah.
O Jerusalem, I have appointed the exiled Jewish nation as watchmen over your walls. All day and all night they shall never cease praying for your welfare. Be not silent, you who remind God of Jerusalem's devastation. Give him no rest until he establishes and makes Jerusalem the praise of the earth.
Okay, so this is the yearning of the Jewish people being described, and that's going to be the subject of tonight's class, where East meets West, the chosen city of Jerusalem, which after the temple was destroyed by the Romans in the end of the 1st century CE, the land of Israel and the city of Yerushalayim was first controlled by the Romans, then by the Persian Byzantines, and by the Christian Byzantines, and various Muslim kingdoms, etc., until the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire took over the Sultan, the Turkish Empire took over in 1517, eventually the Turkish Empire, until in 1917, after the First World War, you have the British that are in control of the city of Jerusalem, along with all of what was then called Palestine. And in 1948, after the War of Independence, the Jews were not able to take control of the eastern part of Jerusalem. Although they fought for it, they lost it. And from 1948 until 1967, the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount is in the Jordanian hands. Jews are absolutely forbidden from entering anywhere within the old city of Jerusalem. There's no Jews that are able to see, no Jews that we know of that are able to visit the Western Wall, to go into the old city during those 19 years. The Jewish sites that were there, the Hurva synagogue, which I believe I mentioned in one of the classes, the synagogue of Yehuda Chassid was destroyed. Many other Jewish areas were destroyed. The Jewish quarter was overtaken. And then comes the day, finally, those few fateful days in June of 1967. Yeah.
With that one important description.
Yes.
In front of the Western Wall was actually, I wouldn't want to call it a slum, but it was basically, they did everything they could to desecrate it. So they had people there basically just living in tents. And in front of the wall, they destroyed all the Jewish cemeteries. So that's, I just want to give you a little background.
I will briefly mention later in the class how they made the plaza after, but yes, absolutely.
But I just want to add that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So let's watch this video.
From the dawn of civilization, armies arrived from the ends of the earth to lock swords over Jerusalem, the city that King David chose some 3,000 years ago as the capital of his ancient Israelite kingdom. 2 subsequent Jerusalem temples served the Jewish nation for most of a millennia from atop the Temple Mount. Their former site remains Judaism's holiest location until today. In the course of the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, the Jordanians occupied East Jerusalem, capturing the Old City and the Temple Mount, and expelling its Jewish inhabitants. A 1949 armistice agreement left this territory in Jordanian hands. But in violation of its agreements, Jordan denied Jews entry to the city and its holy sites. Jordan systematically desecrated and destroyed 58 synagogues, ancient Jewish religious sites, tens of thousands of graves on the Mount of Olives cemetery that had served the Jewish nation for 2,500 years. For 19 years, the ancient capital lay divided between Jordan and Israel, with 7 miles of urban border separating East and West Jerusalem. When war erupted between Egypt and Israel at 7:14 on the morning of June 5, 1967, Israel lacked the manpower and resources to fight on more than one front simultaneously. It concentrated its forces on the Egyptian front, leaving a single brigade to face Jordan. Israel hoped that Jordan would stay out of the fray.
We appealed to King Hussein and to other neighbors to stay their hand, and Israel would do likewise.
But Jordan had already mobilized 11 brigades on Israel's borders. It had invited Iraq's forces to join an attack on Israel, and it had signed a defense pact that placed its army under Egyptian command to better coordinate an Arab-Israeli war. At 9 a.m., at Egypt's urging, King Hussein ordered the indiscriminate shelling of Jewish Jerusalem and other targets. His planes bombed Israeli airfields. Israel bit its lip, hoping that Jordan was making a formal gesture of solidarity with Egypt and that the eastern border would soon fall silent. But by 12:30 p.m., Jordan's offensive morphed from a rumble into a roar. Jordanian troops moved into southern Jerusalem's no man's land and stormed Government House, the UN compound strategic to control of the city's south. Seeing her eastern border catch fire, Israel sent her wings ahead of her claws, first responding to Jordan from the skies. Jordan's airfields and air force were rapidly obliterated. Meanwhile, Israel scrambled to muster an infantry brigade from the north and to divert a paratrooper brigade from the Egyptian front. Israel did not intend to capture the Old City, and certainly not the West Bank. Its stated goal was to secure key roads to Jerusalem, strategic ridges and fortified positions that encircled the city, and to create buffer zones for the future safety of Jerusalem and its environs. Israel also planned to liberate the route to the Mount Scopus demilitarized enclave that included the Hadassah Hospital and Hebrew University buildings. Mount Scopus was located in Jordanian-held territory, but in violation of the armistice. Jordan had severely restricted Israeli access for close to 20 years, rendering the area unusable. In the afternoon of June 5th, Israel launched a surprise assault on Government House. It captured the compound within 25 minutes of fierce fighting, then moved swiftly to take the nearby Naknik and Pa'amon strongholds, so that Israel could take control of the road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. By 8 p.m., these missions were complete. Meanwhile, an Israeli armored brigade stormed the Tel El-Ful ridge that rises some 2,800 feet above sea level. The ridge was key to controlling the Jerusalem-Ramallah route. Fierce battles raged through the night, but by 9:15 a.m. on June 6th, Tel El-Ful fell to Israel. Early in the morning of June 6th, Israel fought one of its bloodiest battles at Ammunition Hill, a fortification that controlled the road to Mount Scopus. At 3:30 a.m., the battle began. Paratroopers advanced, exposed, without air or artillery cover due to the proximity to residential buildings. Barbed wire, minefields, stone-lined trenches, and cement bunkers formed an impermeable nightmare. Every few meters, Jordanian bunkers spewed relentless fire, often requiring hand-to-hand combat to subdue. Eventually, with all their officers dead, individual soldiers led the battle on their own initiative. As the sun rose some 3 hours later, Ammunition Hill fell as silent as a graveyard. 36 Israeli paratroopers had lost their lives, and today, Ammunition Hill serves as a memorial to their sacrifice. Israel was now free to approach Mount Scopus. At 9:30 a.m. on June 6th, Israeli forces approached the enclave and fought a second bitter battle to capture Mivtar Hill. They accomplished their mission, but 34 soldiers fell this time, along with scores of injured. Down south, Israel made its way to Jordanian Jerusalem's Abu Tar neighborhood. They arrived at noon and fought a lengthy battle against 5 fortified Jordanian positions. By 6 p.m., the IDF had completed their immediate mission. All roads to Jerusalem had been secured, and all enemy strongholds in the immediate area had been captured. The Jordanian forces in the Old City were isolated. At 7:45 a.m. on June 7th, the third day of the war, the IDF High Command issued a surprising order: capture the Old City of Jerusalem. 2 battalions attacked the high ground, overlooking the city from the Jordanian side of the Mount Scopus demilitarized zone, while a 3rd battalion headed for the Old City itself. At 9:45 a.m., Colonel Mota Gur breached Lion's Gate, and at 10 a.m., his voice crackled through the army radio, shouting ecstatic words that still ring in Israel's memory. The Temple Mount is in our hands. Minutes later, IDF Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goren arrived to recite the poignant Shehechi Yanu blessing and to sound the shofar, as emotional paratroopers wept and smiled at the ancient stones of the newly liberated wall. The iconic images of that moment have become symbols of Jewish survival and of the nation's inextinguishable bond with the sacred city. A 2nd Brigade entered the city south through the Ashpot Gate to flush out pockets of resistance. At 11 a.m., the Jordanian governor signed surrender papers, and the city elders surrendered at 11:15 a.m. By 1 p.m., the Old City was under Israel's control.
In general, the Jews were ecstatic that they were no longer fighting a defensive war just to be able to survive from the threat of the conglomerate of enemies that were around them. There was a special euphoric joy that was amongst all the Jews for the capture of the Old City and for regaining the Temple Mount and the Western Wall. Very, very special joy that came. That was for sure the highlight of the entire 6-day war. In fact, so much so that even immediately after the war, Levi Eshkol, the prime minister, immediately started offering to give back land they had captured in exchange for peace. The Arabs, a month later, would meet in Sudan, and they would formally reject that idea of land for peace for a number of years. But this became, right away, Levi Eshkol was offering land, but even then, Jerusalem was never on the table. Levi Eshkol was offering to give back the Golan Heights, which Israel later annexed, and was vital for our security, to give back all of the Sinai, to give back much of the West Bank. But Jerusalem was never on the table to give back. He understood even then that that's ours. So what is it about the city of Jerusalem that makes it unique from all other cities in Israel? And that is going to be the discussion for today. Let's start with Temple Mount. The beginning of Temple Mount begins in the beginning. And again, I'm going to go through this much, much more in depth, God willing, on May 30th on Shavuos night. But Adam is created from the soil of Temple Mount. That's where the famous story of the binding of Isaac happens. That's where many leaders and figures in Judaism bring sacrifices to God. If you see this inside text number 2 on page 94. Vivian, you want to read?
94?
Page 94.
Isaac was bound and prepared as a sacrifice on the temple's future site, as it is said, "Go to the land of Moriah and offer Isaac there as a sacrifice on mountain that I will show you." This is Breshit. And in Chronicles it is said, "Then Solomon began to build the temple of God in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where God had appeared to his father David on the site that David had prepared to build the temple, on the threshing floor Aruana the Jebusite. According to unanimous Jewish tradition, the site upon which David and Solomon built the altar on the threshing floor of Aruana is the location where Abraham built the altar on which he prepared Isaac for sacrifice. Also, according to our tradition, Noah built an altar on this site when he left the ark. Cain and Abel offered their sacrifices on an altar on this site. Adam offered a sacrifice there after he was created. In fact, he was created from soil taken from this location. Our sages said man was created from the place where he would find atonement.
So it's a pretty important place, huh? Pretty important. Again, I plan on going much more into depth into many of the stories that we just mentioned briefly. But what's fascinating is that even though we're talking about a place that is pivotal in the story of human history, not just Jewish history, but human history, nowhere in the Torah do you find the name Jerusalem or Yerushalayim being mentioned at all. What is it called? If it's not called Jerusalem, what is it called?
Salem.
What?
Salem.
No, there's different. Well, Avram, I think, called it Yira, and Melchizedek called it Shalem, but you don't find anywhere in the Bible the name Yerushalayim called. When God refers to Melchizedek, well, how does God refer to this place that we now call Jerusalem? So either God calls it the place that I will choose from among your nations, or the place that I will show you. The Mokim Asher Yivchar Sham, the place that God will choose. It has no name. There is no name ever given anywhere in the Bible by God to describe Jerusalem or the Temple Mount. Just the place that I will show you. And that we find many, many times in the Torah. And we'll soon discuss why in a few minutes. But let me first tell you, how do we get Temple Mount? So when the Jews entered the land of Israel, under Joshua, right? They did not conquer the city of Yerushalayim. They conquered most of the land of Israel. They did not conquer the city of Yerushalayim. In fact, in the list in the book of Joshua, which gives a list of all the cities conquered by the army, it ends up with the following verse, text number 3. Irma, you want to read text number 3?
As for the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out. The Jebusites dwell in Jerusalem alongside the children of Judah to this day.
Okay, so why were the Jews unable to get rid of the Jebusites, or the Yevusim as they're called in Hebrew, from the city of Jerusalem? So the reason is, there's a reason of course, several centuries earlier, as is described in the book of Bereshit, Abraham made an oath to Avimelech, the king of the land of the Plishtim, modern day Gaza. And Avimelech made him promise as follows, that you'll be good to me, and you will not lie to me, to my sons, or to my grandsons, you will act to them according to the kindness that I have shown you. And Abraham made that promise. When the Jews of Israel, when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, there were still grandsons of Avimelech alive, living in the city of Jerusalem, that were the people of the Jebusites who were grandchildren of Avimelech. And therefore, because of this treaty that Abraham had made, the Jews left this land alone. They did not conquer it. However, several centuries later, we come to King David. King David's times already, there were no more grandchildren of Avimelech still alive. But now this peace treaty between Abraham and Avimelech has long expired. And so Abraham, in the year 2884, the Jewish year 2884, which in the English calendar is the year 877 BCE, is established as the king of the Jewish people. He first establishes his kingdom in Hebron. For 7 years, he's a king over the tribe of Yehuda, but there is opposition from a man called Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth is the son of King Saul, the first Jewish king, and there is not a unanimous consensus that King David should be king. After several years, when King David wins the trust of the entire Jewish people, and he becomes crowned king by all of the 12 tribes of Israel, which had never really happened before. The Jews were very broken up with different tribes, different judges, different prophets. There had not been a central king of the entire land of Israel. He then, one of his first acts as king was to go conquer the city of Jerusalem and to establish his permanent capital for the entire combined all the tribes of Israel in the city of Yerushalayim. Okay, that's what happens in the times of King David. He conquers a city. And similar to Washington, D.C., which is not part, that's where it ends. Similar to Washington, D.C., where it's not part of any one state of the Union. It is an independent place that's equal to everyone. The exact same thing was Jerusalem, that Jerusalem was not given as part of the tribal inheritance of any one of the 12 tribes. Jerusalem was a city that belonged to all 12 tribes of Israel equally because it was meant to be a city of unity. Okay? Now, he establishes the temple there. After he is to pass away, his son Shlomo HaMelech would be the one to King Solomon would be the one to actually build the temple there. Because of the sanctity and the holiness that would be introduced to Jerusalem by the building of the temple, many laws are enacted, or many laws we have in the Torah that show how Jerusalem is a holier place than anywhere else, even within the Holy Land of Israel. So, for example, text number 4, until the land of Israel, until the city of Yerushalayim was conquered, people were allowed to bring offerings anywhere they wanted in the land of Israel. Right? Let's read it in the back. Devorah, you want to read text number 4? You have your glasses? You have your book? I have an extra book here. Hey, Devorah. Text number 4.
Until Jerusalem was chosen, it was permissible to erect altars anywhere in the land of Israel. Ever since Jerusalem was chosen, it is unacceptable to erect an altar elsewhere, as the verse says, "Take heed not to offer your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Offer them only at the place that God will show."
Okay, so here's one law that from when the temple was built, the only place where a Jew was allowed to offer sacrifices to God was now on the Temple Mount. In addition, the number of other laws. First of all, you had the festival pilgrimage, which is 3 times a year. Every single Jew, every single man, but the women and the kids would go with usually. They had an obligation to go, be Eiler Regel, to go up to Yerushalayim, to go to the Temple Mount, and to witness the revelation of God within the temple. There was also a law called Ma'aser Sheni. Ma'aser Sheni is a second offering, meaning the Jews living in the times of Israel, they had it much worse than you think. We only are obligated to give 1 tithe of 10% to charity. The Jews living in Israel, they had to give 2 tithes. Not 2 tithes, but 2 tithes. You'll figure out what I meant to say. Yes. 2 10%. How's that? But that was after the Truma. So they first gave Truma. The Truma was for the Kohanim, which was 2%, and then there would be a first tithe that went to the Levites, who were the rabbis of the communities, and then there would be a second tithe that, depending on the year, it was used for different purposes. If it was used to give to poor people, or it was used by the owners who would bring it to the city of Jerusalem, and there it will be eaten as a lower level sanctity, but as an offering that can only be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. In addition, there was no Airbnbs back then, right? There was no house exchanges. Every Jew that came to Jerusalem during these holidays to stay there was given free lodging. They found a place for them to stay. And one of the miracles of the temple, it says that even though Jerusalem is not that big, no one ever complained and said it's too crowded for me, there's no space for me in Jerusalem. Somehow they made space, everyone found a place to sleep. Additional law about the holiness and the sanctity of Jerusalem is that you are not allowed to leave any corpse overnight in the city of Jerusalem. If someone's to pass away, their body must be taken out of the city of Jerusalem that very same day. In addition, we don't bury anyone in the city of Jerusalem, with 2 exceptions. You will not find a cemetery or graves anywhere in Jerusalem. You know, Mount Olives and Hamanachis is outside of the walls of the old city. The exceptions are King David and the descendants of the King David dynasty, and a very special prophetess called Huldah, the prophetess, who is also buried in Jerusalem. But besides for that, you do not have any other people buried there. In addition, it's considered a great merit and a great spiritual merit to live in the city of Jerusalem, so much so that halachically one spouse can force the other to move to Jerusalem if they want, and that could be a ground for divorce if they don't want to move to Jerusalem, because that would be considered a better thing to do. And finally, my favorite is that Purim is celebrated a day later in Jerusalem because it's a walled city. The only city we know that was walled in the times of Shushan, aside from Jericho, is Yerushalayim, and therefore when you go to Yerushalayim, they have their own Purim holiday, different from everyone else. From all over Israel, they come to Jerusalem on the Jerusalem day of Purim to celebrate. There's big parties, etc. Anyway, everything I just said to you on the screen behind you, these are only external manifestations of a deeper holiness that exists in Israel, and in Jerusalem, yes.
What is the definition of the city of Jerusalem?
You mean the boundaries geographically?
Geographically, I mean, because the boundaries have changed over the years.
That's an excellent question.
City now.
But the truth is, yeah, we're talking about biblical Jerusalem. However, the reason why it's a good question is because even what we have today as the walls of the old city are not exactly where the original city of Jerusalem was. The walls of the old city of Jerusalem, I'm going from memory now, who were built by one of the Turkish kings from the Ottoman Empire, if I remember correctly. Maybe someone
Saladin.
Yeah, Saladin, something else.
It's Suleiman, no?
Suleiman. I had a Saladin in my head. Suleiman, thank you very much. By King Suleiman. Where he built it is not exactly the same walls of the Ir David, of the old King David's walls. There's some that are the same. There's a fortress the same. There's different. So what we would call today the old city of Jerusalem is not the same as what was biblical Jerusalem. However, what's today modern Jerusalem is obviously much, much bigger than what we're talking about.
Well, the neighborhood we lived in was in the next hill, but still within the city of Jerusalem, is remote.
Okay.
And the question came up is which Purim was celebrated there?
That's a very okay.
And they went to the two chief rabbis, and one said, "Well, it's still part of Jerusalem. It's within the city limits, so you consider that." The other one says, "No, it's too far outside. It's you can't
very
consider
interesting.
it." So they decided to celebrate both.
That's very interesting.
That sounds right.
The celebrating both definitely makes sense. If I was a rabbi, I would have given the same ruling. That would be my ruling too. Do it 2 days. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Okay, but that's so that's the biblical Jerusalem is not exactly. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's not what we have today. Okay, so the question we need to understand now, we're going to deal with a little bit for a few minutes, is why is Jerusalem so much holier, so much more special, that not only do we have all these laws that bring out the sanctity of Jerusalem, but even if you, and I was watching a lot of documentaries about the 6-Day War, the most non-religious soldiers, the most unreligious people were like so, that's what I'm looking for. Inspired is not a strong enough word. For going to the Western Wall, the whole leadership, the whole government of Israel was totally not religious in any way, shape, or form. Moshe Dayan was not religious in any way. He didn't express any kind of love for the old city or the Western Wall before the 6-Day War, and he got swept up into the fervor of the moment. He wanted to be photographed going inside. He went right away to see it. And that night, after we started mentioning about the plaza, that night after the war, after the ceasefire was called, that very night he sent in army tractors to clear out a plaza. He envisioned a plaza where 1,000 people would come to pray, and all of Israel came. It was not the religious that were coming; it was everyone that was coming, because at the end of the day, there's a feeling in the heart of a Jew. This is my homeland. This is my center. This is where it all is. So why indeed is Jerusalem such a holy place that what is it that makes it the holiest place on the earth? Let's just say it like that. So let's start with text number 5. You know, text number 5?
The temple in Jerusalem are holy because of the divine presence that dwells there, and the divine presence is everlasting. Thus it says, I will make your holy places desolate, Leviticus. And the sages explained this verse to mean, even though the places are desolate, they retain their holiness.
Meaning, there's a rule in Judaism that Kedusha le'ezazim emkaima. Holiness does not leave its place. Even though God says I'll make it desolate, it's still holy. It might not look like a very happening situation. It might be lying in ruins. But the inherent holiness and the inherent sanctity of this place of Jerusalem will remain forever and ever. So, we're back to our question. What indeed is this true nature of Jerusalem that makes it so holy and so sacred that it became the chosen home of God on this earth? And if it's so holy, why does God not refer to it by name? Okay? 2 questions. So let's start with that second question. First, text number 6. Josh, want to read?
Three reasons the name of the place is not distinctly stated in the Torah, but alluded to in the phrase, the place that God will choose, etc. First, if all the nations had learned that, in view of the Torah, this place was the center of the universe, they would have occupied it and ferociously battled to retain it. Second, those who were then in possession of the city might have, in spite, destroyed and ruined it to the best of their capability.
Let me interrupt you for a second. So we have one reason is nations would fight for it, they know how holy it is. Number 2 is that nations would ruin it, which, by the way, is exactly what the Romans did after they conquered the temple. They destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They didn't just conquer it. They razed it to the ground. They destroyed any remnant of the city of Jerusalem. They renamed it a different name. Not only that, they forbade Jewish people from entering into the city on the pain of death. Once a year, on Tisha B'Av, the day that we mourn the destruction of the temple, the 9th day of the month of Av, will be the one day a year that Jews were allowed to go into the city of Jerusalem to mourn the destruction of the temple. Because they realized how holy Jerusalem was and how important it was to the psyche of the Jewish people, they did exactly this, where they destroyed the city to prevent it from becoming a holy place again. Although it would always be holy, but that was their intention. Okay, and then the third reason, continue.
Third and most importantly, every one of the 12 tribes would have desired to have this place in its borders and under its control. This would have led to rivalry and discord, such as was caused by Korah's desire for the priesthood. Therefore, it was commanded that the temple should not be built before the appointment of a king who would make all the decisions, and thus minimize the discord.
Meaning, if God in the Bible would have told the Jewish people to come to the city of Yerushalayim, and that will be where you're going to bring the sacrifices, what would happen? Every tribe would be fighting to have this city in their territory. So God deliberately left it vague. Only after King David would be established as a king would he then have the vision and the prophetic insight to understand that this is where the temple should be placed. And once then he was ready, the king and the leader, he could then establish an independent place to be the capital of the entire Jewish people without any tribe being able to fight for it and claiming some kind of rights or ownership to this national capital. Okay? 3 very good reasons that we have so far for why God does not mention the name of Jerusalem. But the next text is my personal favorite explanation. I've taught this before, and this explanation will also help us understand what is so special about Jerusalem. So let's read text number 7. Carol, you want to read? Page 100.
The Torah does not mention the name of the city of Jerusalem. Rather, the city is referred to ambiguously as the place that God will choose. Right. Because we serve God and pray to Him in all places, and everywhere we do so, it is the place that God will choose.
Okay. Well, Rabbi Chaim is explaining something very important. Jerusalem is not only a place on a physical map. Jerusalem is a concept. Jerusalem is an idea. Jerusalem is a meeting point between above and below, as you can see in the next text, and therefore it's available to anyone who wishes to access this point. If God would give a geographical location to where his temple would be, we would think, perhaps correctly, that the only place to really connect to God is in this geographical location. By deliberately not mentioning a place, by God saying that you will bring sacrifices in the place that I will choose, God is really saying that anywhere that you make that, you connect to this vision, to this location in space, in the concept of this location of connection above and below, will be the place that I will choose to connect with you. Which would also explain why we still face to Jerusalem today. Even though we don't have a temple in Jerusalem today. So why do we pray facing east? And remember, we started off the first lesson talking about Daniel, who risked his life being thrown to the lion's den just so he could pray facing towards Jerusalem. Because again, Jerusalem is not a physical, it is a physical place, but it's more than that. The physical Jerusalem is representative of a spiritual concept called where we meet with God. Text number 8. Yes.
So why is sacrificing the animals was only to be done in Jerusalem?
As opposed to anywhere else?
Yes.
Because before the temple was allowed to be done anywhere. Once God now established his home, this is my temple, this is where my Shekhinah is going to rest, and if you want to bring a sacrifice to God, you need to go to his home. Once you establish a place that's your place, that this is my place, if you want to connect to me, you want to bring a sacrifice to me, you got to come to my home.
We can use the same concept for what anywhere else but Jerusalem.
You can use the same concept? Say again?
Same idea, then why we can pray anywhere else?
You could pray anywhere else.
Right.
That's what I'm saying now.
Okay, and not sacrificing animals.
Well, in general, sacrifice and prayer have very different energies, although they're meant to, prayer today is meant to supplement or to replace the sacrifices of then, because we don't bring sacrifices. Prayer is a spiritual experience, and a sacrifice, although it had a spiritual component, was a physical act with a physical animal. And therefore that physical act had to be done in the physical place. Before, the concept of prayer didn't only begin after the destruction of the temple. Even before the destruction of the temple, you have prayer, not in an institutionalized format the way we have it today. But there was definitely a concept. The Jew, wherever he was, he couldn't bring a sacrifice, he could still pray to God. Animal sacrifice as a physical, metaphorical experience to remind you of connecting to God, that had to be done in the specific place of the temple. Okay? So text number 8, about the belly button. You know, everyone knows about a belly button. Charlotte, want to read text number 8?
Just as the navel is located in the center of the human being, so too the land of Israel is the center of the world, as the verse states, dwelling on the navel of the earth. The land of Israel sits at the center of the world, and Jerusalem sits at the center of the land of Israel.
So first of all, if you look at a map, right in the very, zoom into the very middle. What's the very middle of Israel, of the map of the earth? Israel. If you look at a map, Israel's right in the middle. But that's not really what this is saying. What the real meaning of the statement of the Medrash is really a metaphorical statement. Just as your belly is what connects the upper part of your body, your more important organs, with the lower part of your body, so too Jerusalem is what connects the upper elements of existence, meaning heaven, with the lower elements of existence, meaning our place, earth. Again, it's the same concept, meaning that when we talk about the center of the earth, it doesn't only mean in a very physical sense that when you look at a map and you zoom in, the very middle of the map of all the different continents is Israel. More than that, is that the center of Israel being a center is not only physical, but it's in our soul. Meaning it's the place where our physical existence meets up with our spiritual purpose and mission. Just like the food of the Jew that goes into his stomach is like where his body and his soul meet through food. It's like the same idea. And this could be another reason why Jerusalem, this is connected to why Jerusalem is not named. Because the real concept of Jerusalem is a window to heaven. Jerusalem is called the window to heaven. When God wanted to bring his divine energy into creation of the world, the window into which that would happen was through Jerusalem. That's why Adam is created from the soil of Temple Mount. This is the place where heaven and earth meet, right in this spot. And therefore, although Jerusalem is a physical city with physical boundaries and a physical place, in no way should we limit the energy, the connection that we can have to God through Jerusalem to a physical place called Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Bible because God wants Jerusalem to be an experience, to be a concept in our mind, that when we pray, we face towards Jerusalem to realize that we have the ability to also, in our own experience, merge heaven and earth. Okay? And we have time, I'll get back to that idea. So far clear? Okay. So now let's get back to the history a little bit. So, King David is ruling for 40 years, right? As I said before, 7 years he's a ruler over the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. And then for another 33 years, he's a ruler over all of Israel. Towards the end of his life, he makes a big mistake. What's the mistake? He decides to make a census of the Jewish people. He wants to make a census. He's now the king of this entire government of the entire people. He does a census. Although we already know clearly in the Torah that we do not count Jews 1, 2, 3, 4, because why not? No one knows why we don't count Jews directly? It's an ayin hara, an evil eye. When you count something, and especially a lot of something, it can bring an evil eye to say that, why do they merit to have so many people? So we don't count people directly. In fact, when Moshe did a census of the Jewish people, a number of times in the Bible, every time he does a census, exactly, he has every Jew give a half shekel. And then by counting up all the shekels, or all the half shekels, that's how he knows how many Jews there are. Never does Moshe do a census of the Jews directly. It's always through something else. King David makes a mistake, does a direct census, and there's a terrible plague that sweeps through the Jewish people, killing many, many people. Thousands died. And David was extremely remorseful for what has happened. Extremely remorseful. And so he pleads to God for forgiveness, to stop the plague. So God sends a message to King David through Gad Hanavi, a prophet called Gad. What is the prophecy of Gad? Text number 9. Read, Barry?
The prophet Gad came that day to David and said to him, "Go and build an altar to God on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." David went as God had commanded through Gad. Araunah looked out, and he saw the king and his servants approaching. Araunah went out, prostrated himself before the king, and said, "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" David responded, I have come to purchase the threshing floor from you, to build an altar to God, so that the plague will cease from the people." Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take the threshing floor and use it as an altar, and offer to God that was pleasing in his eyes. See, you can take the oxen for burnt offerings, and the threshing tools, and the wooden tools of the oxen for wood." All this Araunah, the chieftain of the Jebusites, wished to give to King David. Araunah said to the king, "May your God accept your sacrifice." "No," David said to Araunah, "I insist on paying for it. I will not offer to my God offerings for which I did not pay." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 silver shekels. He built there an altar and offered various offerings to God. God accepted the offerings, and the plague upon Israel came to an end.
Okay, so here we have this concept that King David buys the land of Temple Mount from Araunah. Simple question. We already established that King David had conquered the city of Jerusalem as soon as he became the king of the entire people. When he comes now to buy this land, this is almost at the end of his kingdom. Why does he wait so many years from after he conquers the city of Jerusalem until he comes to this particular threshing field to buy it, to pay for it, and to make it into the future site of the temple? Even though he's not going to be the one to build it himself, he prepares the groundwork, he lays the foundations. Why does he wait so many years to do this, number one? And number two, why does he pay for it? He just conquered the city. He was a king. He could take it. And in fact, Araunah says to him, "Take it, it's yours." Yeah. God didn't tell him to buy it. He said, David on his own said, "I insist on paying for it because I don't want to give an offering for something which I did not pay for." Yeah.
Maybe he wanted to make sure he had his solidarity as king, because if he went and bought it, then he didn't rule over everyone, it could start like a whole internal war. So he wanted to be solid as king.
Okay, but when he conquered Jerusalem, he already was solid, and conquering Jerusalem was in many ways the act of solidifying his his control over the entire people. This was the capital of the entire land. He was now the king. He builds a fortress. I'm saying he's establishing his kingdom there.
The other thing is maybe he just wasn't ready to be that
Deal with building the temple.
prophet.
Okay. So, yeah.
Well, this is similar to Abraham buying the Mermuna.
It's very similar. Marta Machpelah. It's exactly what we are going to read in the next text. Text number 11. But text number 10 is going to tell us that there's two elements here. When King David bought this land, he didn't buy it out of his own personal money. He specifically paid for it with communal money that he fundraised from the entire Jewish community. Just as I said before, that Washington, D.C. is not a private, it's not a place that belongs to any one state of the Union. Jerusalem is a city of unity. Jerusalem cannot belong to any one family, to any one tribe. David did not want Jerusalem to be his property. He wanted it to be the property that was bought and paid for by the money of the community, by the entire Jewish people. Text number 10. Stuart, do you want to read?
Scripture relates that King David purchased the site of the temple from Arna, the Jebusite. It is clear that this location was not taken earlier from Arana, possibly because he had accepted the peace overture of King David. There's a deeper reason why the site was not previously taken from Arana. It appears that it was God's will that the holy site where the divine presence was destined to reside for all eternity should not be taken by force, even permissible force. Moreover, King David did not want to accept the site as a gift. Rather, he insisted on paying full market value, and he wanted that all of Israel should thereby have a portion in the holiness of all sites.
Okay, perfect. So there's actually two reasons in here. Number one is, as I said, that it's a temple of unity, but also because it's a temple of peace. A temple of peace cannot be acquired by force, even though it's legal force. King David would have been totally legally justified by going with his army and taking over this threshing field of Arnav. He could have done it. He would have been justified. He was the king. But in order to become a home for God, this is a land that had to be acquired in peaceful ways. And therefore, he's deliberately did not acquire it together with the rest of the city that he conquered through war, but he only through money. In fact, that's also the reason why King David is not the one to build the temple. Although he wants to. King David wanted to be the one to actually build the temple himself. And God said to him, your hands are too bloody. You fought many wars, necessary wars. Those are the wars that made Israel into a strong, protected country. But because you fought wars, therefore you're not going to be the one to build the temple. Rather, your son, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, who, because of his father's fights and father's wars, would be able to rule over a very powerful and a very strong nation. He will be a king of peace, and he'll be the one to build the temple instead. In fact, the name Shlomo is from the same word shalom, peace. Okay. Now, as Stuart already said correctly, this idea of King David buying the Temple Mount is very similar to two other pieces of real estate in the land of Israel. One is very, very famous. The cave of our forefathers, Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the cave where Abraham is buried with his wife, where Yitzchak, Isaac, is buried with his wife, with Rivka, where Yaakov, Jacob, is buried with his wife, Leah, and also where Adam and Eve are buried. 4 couples that are buried in this cave. And it's also the place, the way we acquire the tomb of Joseph. Let's read text number 11 inside, and then I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about each one of these 3 places. Text number 11. Steve?
There are 3 locations regarding which the nations of the world cannot harass Israel with the claim that it is stolen. The cave of Machpelah, the holy temple, and the resting place of Joseph. The cave of Machpelah, for it is written, Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price that Ephron had asked, 400 silver shekels. The holy temple, for it is written, David paid Arunah for the site. Joseph's burial place, for it is written, Jacob purchased a plot of land from the sons of the ruler of Shechem.
Okay, So we have here three places that the Jews pay good money in order to be able to lay undisputable claim to these three places. Number one is a cave of Machpelah. Abraham buys it for 400 shekel. Good shekel, interchangeable shekel from Ephron. We have the Temple Mount that King David had bought from Arnava. And we have where Joseph is buried in the city of Shechem, in the city of Shechem that he buys, that Jacob buys from the sons of Shechem for his family to live in. And that's where Joseph is buried, at least according to most interpretations, when his bones are brought to Israel. Let's discuss each one for just a minute or two. What's fascinating about all three of these sites, that all three of these sites that were paid for, all three are highly contested today. Contested should be in quotation marks. Highly contested, because there's no real discussion if you know the history. But all three are today contested and being fought over by the Arabs, claiming that we should not be there. Yes?
Just one more, that we also bought the land from the Turks, from the Ottomans.
Which land?
All of much of Greater Israel, that 65%.
Sure. We discussed it, I think, in one of the classes. Yes, the Jews raised millions of dollars in the 20s and the 30s, and they bought land. Absolutely. I only hear in the Bible, where the Bible tells us clearly that in order, the Medrash say, if you read text 11, why did they pay? All three cases, the Jews didn't have to pay for this. Avram didn't have to pay for Ephron to give him the land. Ephron offers it to him as a gift. And Avram says, I refuse to take it as a gift. I don't want there to ever be someone who will argue and say that this is not legitimately yours. He knew. All three sites, the reason why our ancestors paid in order to buy this land was in order to establish its belonging to the Jewish people forever and ever without any kind of possible way of arguing on that. And of Israel today, these three sites were all captured on the second and the third day of the 6 Day War. Well, the third day. The third day. All three were captured on the third day of the 6 Day War. And these three sites, which were paid for by Jewish money, are the sites that are most contested amongst the Arabs today. Let's talk about each one for a minute or two. Let's talk first about Kever Yosef. Kever Yosef, now, it's true that there's no archaeological proof proving that this is where Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, the one that saves his people and the viceroy of Egypt, is buried there. There is no clear proof one way or the other way, but we definitely have tradition that when Yosef was bought, we just actually learned about this last night in our Monday night Torah and Zip class. We were learning about how Moshe took the bones of Joseph. He miraculously brought them they were buried by the Egyptians in a steel coffin on the bottom of the Nile River. Moshe wrote on a piece of paper, "Rise, O ox," because Jacob had compared Yosef to an ox before he died. Miraculously, the steel coffin of Yosef lifts up from the bottom of the Nile, and it's carried through the desert for 40 years. That we know for sure, the Bible says. And he's brought to his final resting place although it doesn't say clearly in the Bible where, but the accepted tradition is in the city of Shechem, because clearly in the Bible, Yosef is promised by his father an extra portion of land in the land of Israel as a gift from his father. Shechem Echad, an extra portion in the land. And therefore, since the Torah clearly said that the city of Shechem belonged to Yosef, which was a land that his father Yaakov had paid for, that's a tradition that's where he was buried. Again, until 1967, this was in Jordanian control, and Jews were not allowed to go there in any way, shape, or form. After 1967, when the city of Shechem was captured, was conquered by the Israelis, it became a Jewish place of prayer, and eventually there were many fights between the Arabs living there. The Jews were coming in to pray, so eventually Arabs were forbidden to go into this area. It became a completely Jewish shrine, and because of the fights, that's part of what built up the encouragement among Jews that they wanted to go there, because the Arabs were fighting against it, and there was always these issues, etc., until in 1975 it was completely forbidden for Muslims to go there whatsoever. When the Oslo Accords were signed, unfortunately, and Israel ceded control of Shechem to the PA, So this area was also under the PA authority, yet the IDF remained in charge of this particular tomb of Joseph and several other spots that they insisted on maintaining Jewish control over. So the IDF had a presence in the city of Shechem, controlling and protecting the tomb of Yosef, and Jews were still able to go there until the year 2000. In 2000, when the Intifada started, and there was major uprisings, there was huge pogroms outside the tomb of Shechem. I like the whole history. I was reading up, and it's fascinating. Read every back and forth. People were killed there. There was big fights there, and eventually the head of the IDF, I don't remember who it was now offhand, he insisted we have to withdraw. It's costing too much Jewish lives to protect this place. The IDF withdrew during the Intifada from guarding Kever Yosef. Within hours of the IDF retreating, the entire place was burnt down and destroyed and looted. Officially, PA rebuilt it, and then again back and forth. In 2002, there was an operation where Israel once again took over the city of Shechem. Again, the IDF took control over Kever Yosef. Again, the Jews were insisting on going to pray there. For a while, they weren't letting Jews go there. Then they finally, Jews were going illegally, without permits. They were going there to pray. And so eventually they opened it up for Jews to come pray. They have once a month at midnight, at night, when after curfew, the Arabs weren't allowed out of their homes. They would bring Jews in armored buses with very, very heavy patrols in order to prevent the Jews that were going illegally and getting killed, etc. But Jews were literally risking their lives, and there were people that were killed going through an Arab checkpoint. Actually, in 2000, after the IDF retreated, a few hours later, it was burnt. And then they found the body of the nephew of Joseph Lieberman. No, it was found that they killed. Someone wanted to go see what was going on there. He was killed by the Arabs. Joseph Lieberman's nephew. He was like the ministry. This was by Kever Yosef.
Yeah, I thought Tzipelini's nephew was killed there a few years ago.
Could be also. Many Jews were killed, unfortunately, in or around the tomb of Yosef, trying to go pray there, going to see what's going on there. There was a famous lynching of the Jewish soldiers that happened by Kever Yosef, in Shechem, not by Kever Yosef, but by Jews that were there, the officers, and that's when the IDF retreated. So right now, again, it's officially under Arab control. It is possible to go once a month. There is an armed Israeli convoy that goes there, and I think I forgot the year now, 2010 or whatever, that 35 Knesset members insisted on being able to go, and they finally were able to get a permission to go there. And so once a month, there's Jews that go there to pray. In the middle of the night, when no one's awake, they go and they sneak in, they sneak out, and that's the extent of Jewish connection and Jewish presence currently at the tomb of Joseph, paid for by Jacob. Okay. Then we have the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. Hebron was also part of the West Bank. Hebron, Ir HaAvot, the city of our fathers. It is a very, very important city as far as Jewish history is concerned. This is the place where our forefathers lived. The Torah talks about it a number of times. Abraham not only is buried there, he lived there, and Isaac lived there, etc. And we have one of the holiest places after the Western Wall. You have the Ma'arat Machpelah, the cave where all of our forefathers are buried. It's also a holy place for the Arabs because this is where they also revere Abraham. So now, if you go to Ma'arat Machpelah, which is, I shouldn't say it's easy to go to, but it's accessible to Jews at any time. It's accessible to Jews. You need to take armored buses to get there. When we went to Israel our last trip, so the entire trip went, they offered everything not to go for people who were scared. We were the largest group to go there in over a year. People are afraid to go. There was a very, very, very strong military presence when we went to visit. Very strong military. In general, the whole trip, you didn't see the security. For those who were on the trip with us, I remember I was walking, I think with Carol and Marsha, I remember pointing out that there was an armed, undercover security guard with us at all times. No one on the trip, they didn't, unlike America, they walk around with big badges, oh look at me, whatever. Israel's the exact opposite. They don't make noise, they don't talk. There's a guy walking wherever we walked in the old city, there was always an armed guard, casual, in plain clothes, walking with us the whole time. But when we went to Hebron, wherever you looked, there were soldiers everywhere. We had early Friday morning, because that's when everyone's in the mosque praying, so that's when the streets are empty. We went in, and I was speaking to Rabbi Mintz, who runs the trip. He was telling me on the bus that they were just waiting for us to get out of there, to make sure nothing goes wrong. But it's so powerful to go to Hebron. It's one of the holiest cities that we have. You walk there. I spent the Shabbos there when I was in Israel in the summer. You feel the holiness of Hebron. You feel it. You feel it. It's such a holy place. But I wanted to talk about very, very briefly. It's not even part of the class, but it's just important to know. So, in the city of Hebron, in addition, there were Jews who always lived in Hebron. Always lived there. Until in 1929, there was a terrible, terrible massacre called the Hebron Massacre, where 66 Jews were killed by a mob of Arabs who literally went from home to home killing Jews. And 3 days after that, this is when the British were still in charge. What was the British response to the massacre of Hebron? Instead of doing something to the people that had done these murders, they rounded up the rest of the Jews that were still there and shipped them out of Hebron and said, no Jews allowed because we can't protect you. And so the victims were evicted from their homes because they had the crime of being killed in their homes. So those that survived the mob were evicted. And there was a cemetery there called the Old Cemetery of Hebron. A number of very, very holy rabbis are buried in the cemetery. After the Jews were evicted, the last Jews to be buried there in 1929 were these 66 Kedoshim, these 66 martyrs who were killed by the mob. After the Jews were kicked out of Hebron, there was no Jewish presence there until 1967. 1967, when Israel conquered entire Hebron, Jews very badly wanted to move back. It was a very dangerous place to move to because it's a very, very big Arab city. And eventually, after Pesach, the next year, in 1968, Kiryat Arba was founded, which is a Jewish development right outside of Hebron. Kiryat Arba is a village of the four, which is the four patriarchs that are buried in the Marta Machpelah. One of the founding families there was a family called Baruch and Sarah Nachshon. Baruch Nachshon is still alive. He's a pretty well-known artist. And Sarah Nachshon, she had a boy in 1975, and she insisted on doing the bris in Ma'aras Machpelah. It was the first child to be circumcised in the cave of our forefathers in many, many years. And at the bris, the child was named Avram Gididya. Avram, our beloved one. 5 months later, 5.5 months later, she went to her son's crib one day and he had passed away. Since he just died in his sleep. He wasn't sick, he was a perfectly healthy child. He died in his sleep. I saw a video of her saying the story today. It's also in the additional readings. If you read the additional readings later, it's a very powerful story. And she was obviously beyond grief. And she was trying to figure out what kind of purpose could God have had for making my beautiful, precious child, a 5 months old, 5.5 months, to pass away. She decided that his purpose was that he was going to be the one to rededicate the old Hebron cemetery, which you see right here, the picture. This is now, they redid it. This cemetery had been totally destroyed by the Jordanians. 4,000 tombs were removed from the cemetery and used as building material. They deliberately encouraged people to plant produce over there. The cemetery was completely vandalized. And she insisted on burying her son there. The government refused. In general, they had already tried to open up the cemetery before, but because the cemetery was located right on the hilly area, right opposite the Arab marketplace, the government refused to allow it. Be a very big security problem, and the Israeli government refused to allow it. She insisted she's doing her son's funeral there. They come in the whole convoy of cars, of people, the whole community came to help bury her young child. She comes into the city, and of course, she's stopped by an IDF checkpoint, and they refuse to allow her to go. They get commands from on high, back and forth, over an hour. They're negotiating, and they're bringing the officer. More officers come to try and convince her to go to Yerushalayim. He'll get a beautiful burial and Mount Grey, Har Menachos, etc. She refuses. She's adamant. She is not compromising. She's not budging. And after an hour more of back and forth, she asks the boys that are with her to take out her son from the back of the car. She takes her child and she starts walking. And she tells them, if you're not going to let me drive through, I'm going to walk through and bury my son. It was already nighttime. It was already middle of the night. I'm going to walk through myself. She starts walking, this young mother, holding her young child. So walking, holding her child to go bury her child. So obviously the entire everyone follows her. They walk over 100 meters. It's a little different how it's written, if I heard her saying the story. She walks over 100 meters. She's walking into the city, into Hebron. There was no Jewish presence, just Arabs. She's walking, nothing to stop her. All the kids and all the yeshiva students are walking behind her, carrying the shovels, carrying everything to go dig a grave for a child. After she's already deep into the city, one of the officers comes to the jeep and says, "Okay, we just got clearance from the command to let you go through." Later, she found out that the officers were commanded to stop her, and they refused to stop her. They were not going to physically grab her and take her away, watching her grieve like that. And after they refused to follow orders, they finally were given the clearance to at least protect them, make sure nothing happened to them in the cemetery. They went. It was the middle of the night. They dug the grave. She put her child into the grave, and then she said that tonight history is being made because several thousand years ago, Abraham paid for the city, paid for this plot, in order to bury he bought this land for the Jewish people in order to bury his wife Sarah there. And my name is Sarah, and I tonight am rebuying this land for the Jewish people to bury my son Abraham there. And that's how the old Jewish cemetery in Hebron was once again opened for Jewish burials.
Don't mess with the Jewish mother.
Don't mess with the Jewish mother, especially. And then we come to the Temple Mount. Okay? Again, there's a lot of I just wanted to share that story. It's a very powerful story. We now come to the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount also paid for with Jewish monies, that there should be no doubt, in case any moron ever decides to stand in front of the UN or anywhere and say that the Jews don't have a claim to Temple Mount, you should know it was bought and paid for. And we still have a receipt. Anyway, Temple Mount is the holiest place in the world, and we will talk very briefly. The first temple was built by King Solomon. It stands for 410 years until it's destroyed by the Babylonians. The second temple is built 70 years later after the Jews come back, led by Ezra the scribe. It's built for 420 years. It lasts just 10 years longer than the first temple lasts. And it is destroyed by the Romans. God willing, when we have our lecture on the Temple Mount on Shavuos night, I will go much more in depth into both these temples and the history and Ezra the scribe and all that. What I want to talk about now tonight is what we do have left today, the Western Wall. Okay? I want to say one more thing. Let's talk about the Western Wall. The Western Wall that we have today, the most famous Jewish, the most, not only famous, the holiest Jewish place, the Western Wall, is actually not one of the walls of the temple. The temple was completely destroyed. The Western Wall was originally built as a small retaining wall around the hilltop on which the temple was built. When you build on the hill, you have to put in a retaining wall to keep it from the earth from coming out. When King Herod would later build the magnificent temple, the second temple was originally built by the Jews coming back with Ezra the scribe. Again, we're going to talk about this on Shavuos. The Jews were very, very poor. They built this temple out of wood. They had nothing. And the Jews mourned as they consecrated it. Those who remember the glory and the beauty of the first temple, they didn't feel like it was a very, very weak substitute. Later on, King Herod would build a magnificent temple. In fact, the Talmud says whoever did not see the temple built by King Herod has not seen a beautiful building in his life. So he built a retaining wall to hold in this temple he built. This retaining wall is huge. It's huge. When you go to the temple, to the Western Wall today, and you stand by the plaza, you're only looking at a quarter, a small bit of the Western Wall. We have today exposed 187 feet of a wall that is 1,600 feet long. Okay? That wall goes to the entire Muslim quarter. You have, unfortunately, homes that are built up against this wall. Literally up against it. It's like part of the city. It's not, it's a retaining wall. It's hidden behind residential structures in the Muslim quarter that no one can go to. In addition, there's also a smarter part of the exposed wall called the Kotel Katan, the small Kotel, which is also in the Muslim quarter, 600 feet north of the Kotel Plaza. In addition, when you go there and you see the wall, and you see how tall it is, what we're seeing is only the top part of it. The exposed section is 62 feet high. But if you go underground, there's another 105 feet of wall underground. which means that what you're seeing is only a small part of this retaining wall that was built by King Herod. And if you go, God willing, when you go with us to Israel next year, in March 2018, for me, personally, one of my most moving moments of the entire trip in Israel, on a personal note, was in the tunnel tours. Much more moving than at the Western Wall, especially because you're able to go right opposite where they believe temple, the actual Holy of Holies would be, at least approximately. And we'll talk about this on the lecture, exactly where it is as well. You're able to stand right opposite that space. It's the closest that you can get to the Holy of Holies. It's a very special way. Holy, you have ladies that go there to pray. When they're late, and ladies are praying. It's for me, it was an unbelievable spiritual experience. Very, very powerful experience. In addition, when you go into the tunnel tours, and if you're going to that, if you have to go to the tunnel tours, you see the bottom stones of this wall that are huge, huge. Till today, they do not have an explanation how King Herod was able to move such large stones to the Temple Mount. There's different theories. They brought them from Mala. There's another development. There's different theories. But the largest stone is 43 feet long and weighs approximately 570 tons. That's big. They don't know how he moved that stone there. The average size stone in that retaining wall is between 2 to 8 tons and is about huge. Limestone blocks that were made right out of the stone. You can see the again. If you go there with the ark with the tour guide, they'll show you the different stones of different generations of different times with their border around. The way you can tell the Herodian rock is that there's a border and gray like around where they cut it. Again, it's details that are fascinating. I would strongly recommend you go to Israel with us next year, but especially to go into the tunnel tours and to see these stones and to be that close to the Holy of Holies is really very, very special. Yeah.
Have you ever been up to the Holy of Holies inside?
No. There's a reason why not.
Temple Mount itself?
Temple Mount itself.
I was in there.
I was in there too.
So I will, God willing, again, on this night of Shavuos, I plan on talking about it at great length. It's a big debate in Jewish law today. There are religious Jews that are insisting that we have to go up to Temple Mount, and many, many rabbis, the Rabbi included, were very strongly against it on halachic reasons. Forget about the practical issues involved. That felt that as Jews we shouldn't be going on to Temple Mount, going up Temple Mount, which is not easy to go to. You have to get special permission. It's not open to the public. But there are Jews that go there. There are religious Jews that go there. The vast majority of religious Jews do not go there. And again, tonight's not the night to get into the halachic discussion. I promise you, come for the Shavuos dinner. We're offering a special price because I want all of you to come. I want to continue from the JLI class, and we will talk about it, the different issues involved and what the different theories are. Even within Temple Mount, there's different places within Temple Mount that some say you could go, can't go. We'll discuss that, but not tonight. Okay? Anyway, continuing on. When you think of the Kotel, what do you think of? Prayer, the stones, the notes, the notes. Famous joke of this guy, this lady, the rabbi comes and scolds to come to the rabbi, and she's complaining to the rabbi she has no kids. She's married a few years, she wants to bless with children. So the rabbi says, perfect, next week I'm going to Israel. I promise that when I get to Israel, I'm going to go to the Western Wall, I'm going to put a note into the wall. It's the custom, you write a note, I'm going to put it into the wall, and I'll pray for you. Anyway, a few years go by. This rabbi happens to be Mrs. Goldstein again in the supermarket. He says, "Nu, how are you? You have had some kids. The blessings worked." He said, "Have they worked?" "I had 3 sets of triplets. I have 9 kids running around my house." So, wow, that's beautiful. How is your husband doing with all those kids? So he said, "My husband's in Israel. He went to Jerusalem." So your husband went to Jerusalem and left with 9 kids. What's he doing in Jerusalem? He's looking for the note to take it out of the wall. Okay. Yeah.
All the notes.
They take them out once or twice a day. They clean out the wall, and not the day. On occasion when it gets too full, I don't know exact.
Nighttime.
Before Pesach probably they do, but I don't know if it's only once.
think I read it twice.
Probably a few times a year. It's more than just once a year. It's too much. There's too many pieces of paper with really only once a year. I'm sure
That's what I was wondering.
they take them out, they clean the wall, and they get burned.
No, I don't think bury them. I thought they buried them.
I think maybe I'm wrong. You can double check. I'm sure if you Google it.
I heard burned also.
But I believe that I'm just going again from memory. I'm not. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But we can check after the class. Someone can check and. Okay, go check. I'm sure it'll probably say somewhere on Google or something what happens in the notes. Okay. Anyway, let's go to text number 13, talking about. Text number 12. Standing behind the wall. Jackie, text number 12.
Behold, he stands beyond our wall, Song of Songs 2-9. This refers to the western wall of the Holy Temple, which God swore would never be destroyed.
Right, the Kotel Maravi, many beautiful songs, the wall that would never be destroyed. It's a whole nother story. It's not for tonight, but all the time. When they were trying to destroy the temple, they were each general in charge of destroying one wall. They destroyed it in this wall. They couldn't destroy it, and the guy who was in charge of destroying it eventually jumped off the wall and committed suicide because God decreed that this wall would never be destroyed. So the Jews should always have some place where they can come to be reminded and to be connected to the spiritual holiness of what was once our temple. And therefore, when we think of the Kotel, we think of prayer. This is the place where a Jew comes to pray. Not just because it used to be the temple, but because the first time we have this concept of prayer in the formal sense is Jacob. Not the first time I pray, I take that back. But you have that Jacob went to, and Jacob was running away from his brother that wanted to kill him. Read another story. Esau wants to kill his brother Yaakov, and he runs away. That night, he goes to sleep. And what happens in the middle of his sleep? What happens? Who knows what happens? He has a dream. And in the dream, he sees a ladder, right? Jacob's ladder, with the angels going down and up the ladder. Not up and down, but down and up the ladder. And he wakes up. And what does Jacob say when he wakes up? Text number 13. Mark, can you read?
Jacob awoke in great fright and said, God's house is in this place. As it is written, Jacob was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. From here we learn that all who pray in this place, in Jerusalem, it is as if they pray before God's throne. The entryway to heaven is there, and the door is open for prayers to be heard. As it says, this is the gate of heaven.
And so this is a whole, as we already discussed before, that the merge, the connection spot between heaven and earth is in Jerusalem, and more specifically on Temple Mount. This is a Shar Hashemayim. This is the gate to heaven. This is the window through which our prayers ascend directly on high, because this is the window between heaven and earth. And therefore, when the Jew goes to pray at the Western Wall, God is going to hear his prayers, because, as a famous joke goes with the, whoever it is, let's say Bibi Netanyahu goes to visit Putin in Russia, and he comes to see in Putin's office. There's a special on his phone. In his office, there's two phones, a black phone and a red phone. He says, what's the black phone for? This is for my regular calls. What's the red phone for? This is where I call God. My special line to heavens. Okay, so the Bibi is going to make a call. Sure, no problem. Anyway, a few weeks later, he gets a bill for a lot of money. Anyway, President Trump comes to, long story short, President Trump comes to Israel. He's coming soon. He's in Bibi's office, and he sees also this red phone on the desk, and he says, what's this phone for? He says, this is my direct line to heaven. So Donald Trump says, can I make a call to heaven? I need to make a phone call. I have some secrets to share. So he makes a phone call. He spends like 15 minutes on the phone, and then after he's done the phone call, he gets a bill for like 25 cents. So I said, that's it, 25 cents, so cheap. That was a long call. So Bibi says, but here it's a local call, so it's,
Very nice.
Anyway, that was just off the cuff, remember the names. The point is, it's a local call. When you're standing by the western walls, God says, God says, I'm standing behind the wall, I'm listening, because this is my window. This is you're directly opposite the entrance to the heavens. When we pray, we specifically use a metaphor of a ladder for prayer. What's the idea of a ladder? A ladder starts on the ground, right? And works its way up. That's a ladder, right? And so to the metaphor of prayer is you start on the bottom and you slowly elevate yourself. You slowly prepare yourself. You go higher and higher and higher. This is the idea of the prayer. This is the idea of the prayer. If you look at text number 14, where we go higher and higher to connect to God, just like a candle. Let's read it inside. It's a beautiful text. Text number 14. Tara, you want to read?
The highest level of the ladder of prayer is reached when you are so inspired as to want nothing but the feeling of attachment with God. On this level, tefillah is related to the verb used in Mishnah Hebrew. Toka, to attach or join or bind together, as two pieces of broken vessel are pieced together to make it whole again. Our soul is truly part of godliness, and is therefore longs to be reunited with and reabsorbed in godliness, just as a small flame, when it is put close to a large flame, is absorbed into a larger flame. We may not be aware of this longing, but it is there nevertheless. Our soul has in fact been called the candle of God, Proverbs 20:27. The flame of a candle is restless, striving upwards to break away, as it were, from the wick and body of the candle. For such is the nature of fire, to strive upwards. Our soul too strives upwards, like the flame of the candle.
Okay, people always ask me, why do I shake so much? I know that I'm on video, and it's hard to watch a guy going back and forth like this, whatever. So first, that's the only exercise that I do. But besides for that, the reason why a Jew shuckles so much is because the soul of man is the candle of God. All the way around. The candle of God is the soul of man. And just as you just read, just like a flame is constantly flickering because it's yearning to go up to its source and wants to leave the wick, wants to elevate itself, so too the soul doesn't really want to be in the body. Soul wants to be hanging out in heavens, under God's throne of glory. It's stuck in the body. So when you're eating pizza and ice cream, the soul is not so expressed, not so revealed. So you're not shaking when you're eating pizza like this. But when you're praying, when you're teaching Torah, the soul is on fire, the soul is aflame, the soul is awake. And when the soul is awake, it's very hard to keep the flame standing still in the perfect position. It's burning to get out. This is the idea of the Kota. We feel a natural longing for Israel. Jews across the world have always felt a desire to be in Israel. And when you come to Israel, even if you didn't feel it before, you feel, I'm in my homeland. This is my place. This is my home. Why? Because the soul is naturally drawn to its home, is naturally drawn to holiness. And you feel that strongest when you're standing right by. When does a candle flicker the most? When it's right next to a very strong fire. Right, put a candle here, it'll flicker. But if you have a big torch here, the candle will be trying to jump to get to the torch. The moment we can get to the bigger fire, it will leave the small match behind and go to the bigger source, the bigger flame. When the soul is next to a holy place, next to the window to heaven, it only burns even stronger. And that's why the Temple Mount is the holiest, it says in text 15, because once God now was established, once King David made this as his place, this now became the physical manifestation of God's Shekhinah into the world. And once it became his place, even Jerusalem now is not as holy as the Temple Mount. And again, we'll discuss that God's willing on Shavuos. Now, text number 16 is that this, within Temple Mount, there's a holier place in Temple Mount. You have the land of Israel is holy. The city of Jerusalem is much holier. The western wall on the Temple Mount is even holier. And then on Temple Mount, there's a specific spot of Temple Mount, which is the holiest place in the world, which is the Holy of Holies. Even those people that would go on Temple Mount would agree that the Holy of Holies is completely off limits. Only the Kohen Gadol is allowed to go in only once a year, on Yom Kippur. Otherwise, no one's allowed to go into there. And let us read about this Holy of Holies, text 16. Tom?
In the first temple, the ark and the temples were housed in the Holy of Holies chamber. The Shekhinah, that is the revelation of God's infinite light, was manifested there, and it was expressed in the Ten Commandments, etched on the tablets. The level of godly light that was manifested in the Holy of Holies greatly exceeded that of the analogs, spiritual Holy of Holies, chambers in the supernal world. But the Ten Commandments comprise the principle of the whole Torah, and the Torah derives from God's wisdom. The holy transcends the divine energy that is invested in the creation. Moreover, the engraving of the Ten Commandments on the material stone tablets did not entail any metamorphosis or diminishment of the divine wisdom. Thus, while this material world functions through the garment of the physical laws of nature, the tablets are handwork in God, and written upon it is written of God. The tablets define the nature of the material world, of this material world.
Okay, so this Holy of Holies was a room that was approximately 30 feet by 30 feet, and inside there was a stone that the Aron, the ark, which had the tablets inside it, was perched on top of the stone. Before the temple was to be destroyed, the ark and many of the other vessels of the Beit HaMikdash were hidden in the underground tunnels built by King Chizkiyahu. King Tzidkiyahu. They were buried underground. They were hidden away. They still exist somewhere in the tunnels underneath the Temple Mount. And when the Jews rebuilt the second temple, they did not have the ark. All they had was a rock in the place of that ark. According to many opinions, it's debatable. It's not a unanimous opinion, but according to many opinions, the rock of the dome of the rock is that exact same rock that we would call in Jewish literature Even HaShasiyah. Even HaShasiyah was the rock which was used as a replacement for the ark in the second temple, and which was the base of the ark in the first temple. But just as we said before, that Jerusalem and Temple Mount are not only physical locations on a geographical map, but they're also ideas and ideals of a mental space of connection to God. The same is true with the holiest part of the Temple Mount. Holy of Holies, it represents a place deep within the very essence of our being, the core of our identity, that's not easily accessible. You can reach it on Yom Kippur, you can reach it on certain occasions, and you can reach into the very essence of your being to find the Holy of Holies that exists inside there. Let me end with the prophecy of Zechariah, a beautiful prophecy, text number 18. Brian, you want to read? Page 112, a prophecy, and a quick story.
God has said, I will return to Zion, and I will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Old men and women shall once again sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with their staff in hand because of old age. The streets of the city shall be filled with boys and girls playing there.
This is a prophecy. The time will come once again. Jerusalem will not be a desolate place where Jews are forbidden to be there, but we'll be able to sing and dance and play there. A quick story to end off the class. In 2004, there was a JLI trip to Israel, the land of the Spirit, before our group, the year before, trip before that. And one of the rabbis that went was Rabbi from San Antonio, Texas. He's actually a friend of my father's. And he had in his delegation, his community delegation, there was a lady that was from Russia, a Russian immigrant, who was there with a 9-year-old son. During their trip, they went to the Old City, of course, and they were getting a tour of the Old City. And the tour guide was showing them a specific playground in the Old City of Jerusalem. And he said to them, this particular playground has a tremendous personal significance for me. Why? Because his grandfather, this is the tour guide. By the way, one of the other advantages of the JLI trip to Israel is that they have absolutely the best tour guides around. They're handpicked by the JLI staff out of hundreds of tour guides, and they're phenomenal. So the tour guide was telling them a personal story about his grandfather. His grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. After the war was over, eventually was able to make Aliyah and come to Israel, and he settled in the Old City before independence. He was living in the Jewish quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem. Came 1948, he ran for his life. The Jordanians chased him out of Egypt, out of the Old City, and he was very, very traumatized by this experience, having lived through the Holocaust, having already lived once through being expelled from his city and being rounded up, being deported, to have it happen to him a second time when he was deported from his home. But in Israel, in the city of Jerusalem, took a very, very strong psychological toll on him. After the liberation of the Old City of Jerusalem in 1967, he absolutely refused to go back to the Old City. He wasn't able to handle it. It was chased away. He had no interest in going back. Many years he didn't go into the old city, didn't go see the Kotel, he was done. Until eventually, there was a bar mitzvah, there was some kind of family event, they convinced him to finally go to the Kotel, to go into the old city of Jerusalem. Many, many years after 67. He comes into the old city, they're going to the Kotel, I think for some event, and all of a sudden the school bell rings, and he sees from a yeshiva in the old city, a bunch of kids run out to the playground to go play, on this particular playground. And when he saw that, he saw the rebirth, the renaissance of Jewish life in the old city, he didn't believe was possible. Tears began to stream down his cheeks. He said, now I am witnessing the fulfillment of the prophecy of what we just read a second ago. Text 18, the prophecy of Zechariah, that Od Yeshuvu, that once again the elders and the young will return here. Yiladim v'yiladis mesachtim b'rechayim. Said that the young children will play in the streets. Even when he was there before 48, that wasn't happening. To have a playground of Jewish kids playing freely, happily, and it took him out of this trauma he'd been living for many, many years. That's the story that the tour guide shared with the group. The next morning in the hotel, they're eating breakfast. The hotel's right outside the old city, King David Hotel, and they're eating breakfast, and this young boy is nudging his mother. He wants to go back to that playground. He wants to go play on that playground. He's nudging the whole day, he's nudging, to finally take a taxi, and they go to the playground. He plays for a few minutes on the playground, he's happy, they go home, back to the hotel. Next day again, he's begging and begging, he wants to go to the playground to play. And every single day that they were in Jerusalem, this kid insists they took a taxi, or they went to the old city. He played on the playground for 10, 15 minutes, and then they went home, they went back and they joined the tour for the rest of the day. When Rabbi Chaim Block asked the mother, what's the deal with going back to the playground? She said when she asked her son why he's so insistent on going to the playground to play, this 9-year-old boy told her as follows. That we're only here for a few more days, and then we're going back to Texas. For every day that I'm here, I want to be a part of the prophecy of Zechariah, that once again children will play in the streets of Yerushalayim. And so God willing, the prophecy is starting to come true. We're seeing it already begin to happen. And God willing, very, very soon, the complete fulfillment of the prophecy, where in the entire city of Yerushalayim, in the entire land of Israel, Jewish children will once again be able to play freely, without fear or worry of terrorism, of intifadas, of missiles, of rockets, that once again, Israel should be completely ours, where the Jews are celebrating the young and the old. We return back to our homeland very, very soon, God willing. Amen. Amen. Next week's class will be the most controversial of all the classes. We'll be discussing the concept of land for peace, which I mentioned very briefly wasn't planned out, became the mainstream plan, the policy of America after they tried the ceasefire. And we'll discuss the West Bank that was conquered by Israel, the settlements, and how we should deal with that issue today. Thank you very much.